The day started like any other for Lisa, a single mom of two trying to stretch a few dollars into a week's worth of meals. The bills were piling up, the fridge was nearly empty, and hope felt like something she couldn't afford anymore. She wasn't looking for miracles, just a break, something small to remind her that life hadn't given up on her yet. That's when she saw it, a flyer taped to a lamppost that read, *storage auction, everything must go. She almost walked past it, but something about those words made her stop. She'd seen shows about storage auctions before, people bidding on abandoned units, sometimes striking gold, sometimes walking away with trash. It was risky. Foolish, even. But what did she have left to lose? With just $150 in her bank account and rent due in 3 days, she made a decision that would change everything. When she arrived at the auction, there were only a few others gathered, mostly older men who looked like they'd done this 100 times before. They laughed and joked, calling it junk hunting. She felt out of place, clutching her last bit of savings in a crumpled envelope. The auctioneer moved fast, shouting numbers in a rhythm she could barely follow. One by one, the units sold off, dusty, cluttered, forgotten. Then came the last one. Unit 19, the man called out, sliding open the heavy door. A wave of dust spilled into the air. Inside, it looked like a graveyard of someone's life. Broken furniture, old boxes, piles of random junk. Nobody seemed interested. The crowd started to turn away. But something made Lisa step forward. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the small wooden chest in the corner, half hidden under a top, or maybe it was just her gut telling her not to walk away. $50, she said quietly. The auctioneer raised an eyebrow but called it. 50 going once, going twice, sold. The crowd moved on. Lisa stood there alone, staring into the dark, cluttered space she had just bought, completely unaware that inside that dusty unit was something waiting for her. Something that would change her life forever. The moment the metal door slammed shut behind the auctioneer, Lisa was left standing in silence, staring at her new investment. The air inside the unit was heavy with the smell of dust and age, and tiny flecks floated through the sunlight that spilled in from the open doorway. She didn't know where to start. There were boxes stacked unevenly, old suitcases, a mattress with a spring sticking out, and piles of what looked like someone's forgotten life. For a second, doubt hit her like a wave. What had she done? $50 she couldn't afford, spent on a pile of junk. Still, something inside her wouldn't let her turn back. She rolled up her sleeves, took a deep breath, and started to sort through the mess. The first box was full of old clothes, faded shirts, worn jeans, and mismatched shoes. The next one was filled with cracked dishes and tangled cords. Nothing special. She sighed, brushing the dust from her hands. But when she looked deeper inside, she noticed a few things that caught her eye. A small jewelry box, an old photo frame without glass, and a stack of letters tied with a red ribbon. She set them aside carefully. Hours passed as she worked. Sweat dripped down her forehead, and her hands turned grey from grime. Every object she touched felt like a story frozen in time, pieces of someone's life that had been packed away and left behind. There was sadness in it, but also something comforting, as if she wasn't completely alone in that quiet storage yard. When she reached the back of the unit, she noticed the wooden chest again, the same one that had made her bid in the first place. It was small but heavy, with a strange design carved into the lid. Dust covered every inch of it, and a rusty lock kept it shut. She hesitated for a moment, feeling her heart beat faster. It wasn't valuable looking, not at first glance, but there was something about it, something that felt intentional. She found an old screwdriver and pried at the lock until it finally gave way with a loud snap. The lid creaked open, releasing a puff of stale air. Inside, she expected to find more junk, maybe some books or tools. But instead, there was a single object wrapped in layers of soft fabric. She lifted it carefully, her hands trembling without knowing why. As she unwrapped the cloth, a faint shimmer caught the light. It was a box, a smaller one, made of metal, ornate and beautiful in a way that didn't fit with the rest of the junk. It looked old, maybe antique, with detailed engravings that twisted across its surface like vines. She turned it over and found a name faintly etched into the bottom. Margaret Ellis, 1942. Lisa froze. The name didn't mean anything to her, but the year did. It made her think of something much older than she expected, something that didn't belong in a dusty storage unit. The box had no visible latch, no hinges, nothing. Just metal, sealed tight. She set it down on the floor and stared at it. Her curiosity grew stronger than her hesitation. What was inside? Jewelry? Documents? Something valuable? She didn't know, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of excitement, like life had just handed her a mystery to solve. That night, she took the box home, still wrapped in its cloth. Her kids were asleep when she placed it on the kitchen table under the yellow glow of the light. She made herself a cup of tea but couldn't stop staring at it. She ran her fingers along the engravings again, tracing the patterns. It almost felt warm, though that could have just been her imagination. She tried to open it again, pressing at the corners, tapping gently, even shaking it, but nothing worked. The box wouldn't budge. Eventually, she set it down, frustrated. Maybe it wasn't meant to open. But when she looked closer, she noticed something she hadn't before, a faint seam running along one edge. Not a hinge, but a sliding panel. Her heart started to race. She held her breath and pushed gently, and this time, the panel gave way, revealing a small compartment. Inside, wrapped in delicate tissue paper, was a velvet pouch and a folded letter, yellowed with age. Her hands trembled as she opened the pouch first. A necklace fell into her palm, a simple gold chain with a locket, still shining as if it had been untouched for decades. She turned it over and gasped. There was a photograph inside, tiny and worn, showing a young woman with bright eyes holding a baby in her arms. On the opposite side, a small inscription read, * for when the time is right. * Lisa stared at it, her heart pounding in her chest. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. She unfolded the letter next, careful not to tear the fragile paper. The handwriting was neat and elegant, the ink slightly faded but still readable. It began with the words, * to the one who finds this. * She stopped reading for a moment, her hands trembling. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, maybe a love story, maybe a confession, but whatever was written in that letter, it was clear this wasn't just another box of forgotten things. This was something personal. Something meant to be found. And for reasons she couldn't explain, it felt like it had been waiting for her. Lisa read the first line of the letter again, her pulse quickening. * to the one who finds this. It felt as though the writer was speaking directly to her. She swallowed hard and continued reading. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, each word carrying the weight of years. The letter spoke about a woman named Margaret Ellis, who had hidden something precious during the war, something she could never reclaim. If this reaches you, it said, then time has done what I could not. Keep what you find. It belongs to those who still believe in second chances. Lisa's eyes filled with tears before she even understood why. The letter wasn't just about an object, it was about loss, hope, and the belief that even broken things could matter again. She looked down at the necklace, still gleaming faintly in her palm. It wasn't the shine of gold that caught her, it was the feeling that this had been meant for her to find. But she needed to know more. Who was Margaret Ellis? Was she real? And why did this letter sound like a farewell? The next morning, after dropping her kids at school, Lisa sat in the local library with the letter and the locket on the table. She searched old archives, her fingers trembling as she typed the name. It didn't take long for something to appear, a newspaper clipping from 1943. * Local woman hides valuables during evacuation, never seen again. * There was a photo. The woman in the picture looked familiar, her face gentle, her eyes filled with the same quiet strength that Lisa saw in herself when she dared to look in the mirror. She leaned back, trying to process it all. The storage unit she'd bought wasn't random. This woman's belongings had been stored, forgotten, and somehow ended up in her hands decades later. The realization gave her chills. It felt too intentional, too personal to be chance. That evening, she told her oldest son about what she'd found. He was 12, curious, and full of wonder. "So it's like a treasure?" he asked, eyes wide. She smiled softly. "Something like that. But maybe the real treasure isn't what's inside, it's what it means." He didn't fully understand, but he hugged her and said, "You should keep it. Maybe it's lucky." Over the next few days, strange things began to happen, not eerie, but uncanny. Opportunities started showing up in ways Lisa couldn't explain. A local thrift shop owner she knew offered to buy some of the items from the storage unit, giving her more money than she expected. Then, out of nowhere, a part-time job opened at the library, the very one where she'd found the article. It was almost as if life was quietly rearranging itself, making room for something new. Late one night, while cleaning the locket, she noticed something she had missed before. The back of the photo wasn't just blank. There were tiny initials etched into the paper. *M.E plus J.T. She flipped through the letter again, searching for clues. Toward the end, she found a line that stood out. If you find him, tell him I kept my promise. Her curiosity grew into determination. She searched the archives again, this time for the initials JT. There were dozens of results, but one name appeared more than once. James Turner, a soldier who had served in the same town during the same time. The report said he was injured in battle, presumed dead, but later found alive after the war ended. She followed the trail until she found something unexpected, an obituary dated just 5 years earlier. The photo next to it showed an old man with a soft smile, holding a pendant that looked exactly like hers. Her breath caught. The caption beneath it read, James Turner, World War II veteran, reunited with half of a lost keepsake he once shared with a woman named Margaret Ellis. Half. Her heart began to race. Could the locket she found be the missing piece? The next morning, Lisa reached out to the historical society mentioned in the article. A woman answered the phone, polite but curious. When Lisa described what she'd found, there was a long pause. "You're not going to believe this," the woman finally said. "Margaret's belongings were never recovered. We only had half of the story, until now." They met 2 days later. Lisa brought the locket and letter, wrapped carefully in cloth. The historian handled them with reverence, her hand shaking slightly. "This," she said softly, "is the other half. They were separated when the town was evacuated. We always wondered if it still existed." Lisa stood there, overwhelmed. For a moment, she could almost see it, two people torn apart by war, each holding a promise they couldn't keep, both believing in a reunion that would never happen. Now, decades later, their story had found its ending in her hands. The historian looked at her and smiled. "You know, some things don't find the right person until the world thinks they're ready." Lisa left the building with the locket still in her hand. The sky above was grey, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel the weight of it. Maybe this wasn't about money or luck at all. Maybe it was about connection, about how even when life falls apart, something beautiful always finds its way through the cracks. And deep down, she knew the truth. She hadn't just bought a storage unit full of junk. She had uncovered a story that was waiting for her, one that had been carried across time, hidden away, and finally found its way home. The story of the locket spread faster than Lisa expected. The historian had shared the discovery with a local journalist, and soon, a small article appeared online titled Single Mother Uncovers Forgotten World War II Love Story. It was meant to be a local piece, something heartwarming for the community, but within days, it went viral. People from around the world began reaching out, sharing messages of awe, gratitude, and even their own stories of lost letters and hidden treasures. For the first time in a long while, Lisa didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not for her struggles, but for something she had brought back to life. At first, she was nervous about the attention. Reporters wanted interviews, neighbors stopped her in the grocery store, and strangers sent letters to her home. She wasn't used to anyone caring about her story. But as she read through the messages, one stood out. It was from an elderly woman named Ruth Turner, James Turner's niece. Her email was short, but every word carried emotion. "My uncle used to talk about Margaret Ellis all the time," she wrote. "He never stopped looking for her. I would love to meet you." They agreed to meet at a small cafe in town. When Ruth walked in, her grey hair tucked neatly behind her ears, she carried a photo album in her hands. "He kept this till the day he died," she said, sliding it across the table. Lisa opened it carefully, her breath catching as she turned the pages. There were photographs of James as a young soldier, smiling with the same locket around his neck, and letters, dozens of them, written to someone named Margaret. None had ever been sent. "He thought she was gone," Ruth whispered. "But he never threw these away." Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. The two halves of the story were finally together. The love that time had separated now reunited through chance, through her. Ruth reached across the table and took Lisa's hand. "You did something no one else could," she said softly. "You gave their story an ending." That night, when Lisa returned home, she sat at the kitchen table staring at the locket. The moonlight caught the gold surface, making it glow softly. She thought about everything that had happened, how a simple auction, a single decision, had led her here. It didn't feel like coincidence anymore. It felt like purpose. Maybe some stories wait to be found, she thought. Maybe they choose the person who needs the most. The next morning, her phone rang. It was the local museum. They had heard about the discovery and wanted to feature the locket and letters in an exhibit about wartime love stories. Lisa hesitated. It wasn't about fame or recognition. This had become something deeply personal. But when she thought about Margaret and James, about how their story had endured across decades, she knew it was the right thing to do. She agreed, and a few weeks later, she stood in front of a glass display case in the museum, the locket and letters resting under soft lights. People passed by slowly, reading the story written beneath the display. Some smiled, some cried. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and whispered, "That's so beautiful." Lisa felt her throat tighten. Standing there, she realized that this wasn't just about the past, it was about hope, about how love and memory could survive anything, even being forgotten. After the exhibit opened, opportunities began to follow. A local charity reached out, offering her a steady job organizing donations. "We need someone with heart," they said. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. For the first time in years, she felt stable, not just financially, but emotionally. The weight that had pressed on her for so long was gone. But the most unexpected moment came one quiet evening when she was tucking her youngest daughter into bed. The little girl looked up at her and said, "Mom, do you think things find us when we need them?" Lisa smiled softly, brushing her daughter's hair back. "Maybe they do," she whispered. "Maybe some things aren't lost at all. They're just waiting for us to notice." Later, as the house grew silent and her children slept, Lisa stood by the window, looking at the stars. Life had been hard, unfair even, but she finally understood something her grandfather used to say: "Miracles don't shout, they whisper." The storage unit, the letter, the necklace, they had all whispered to her. They had reminded her that even in the darkest corners of life, something extraordinary could still be hiding, waiting for the right hands to uncover it. And as the night settled over the quiet street, Lisa closed her eyes and let out a long breath. Somewhere out there, she thought, Margaret and James were smiling too. Months passed, and life slowly settled into something calm and steady again. The museum exhibit ran for weeks, and letters kept coming, not from reporters this time, but from people who had seen her story and wanted to share their own. Some wrote about things they'd lost and never found again, while others spoke about how Lisa's discovery reminded them to keep faith. She read every one, carefully folding each letter and storing them in the same wooden chest that had once held the locket. It became a box of voices, strangers bound by the same invisible thread of hope. Lisa's days began to take on a gentle rhythm. She still worked at the charity office, where she organized donated clothes and household items for struggling families. It wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding. Every time she handed a box to someone who needed it, she thought of that day in the storage yard, how she had once stood surrounded by what looked like junk, only to find meaning buried beneath it all. Sometimes, when she caught a glimpse of someone smiling in relief, she'd think, *maybe this is what I was supposed to do all along. Her children noticed the change too. There was lightness in her voice again, laughter that had been missing for years. One Saturday morning, while cleaning the living room, her youngest son pointed to the locket hanging by the window and asked, "Mom, are you ever going to sell it?" Lisa smiled. "No," she said softly. "Some things aren't meant to be sold. They're meant to stay." He didn't ask again, but she saw the understanding in his eyes, a quiet kind of respect. As spring turned to summer, the historian called her again. "There's something you should see," she said. Lisa met her at the museum, where a new exhibit had been added, a digital archive of stories inspired by hers. There were photos, handwritten notes, and small artifacts from people all over the world. The display was titled *The Things We Keep*. Underneath, her name appeared, not as the discoverer, but as the one who reminded us to look closer. Lisa stood there for a long moment, her chest tight with emotion. For the first time, she didn't feel like a background character in someone else's story. She was part of something bigger, something that connected strangers across time and distance. That evening, as she walked home, the sky glowed pink with the last light of day. She passed the thrift shop where it had all begun, the same one that had once bought the leftovers from her storage unit. The owner, an older man with kind eyes, waved from behind the counter. "You look different these days," he said when she stepped inside. She laughed. I guess I feel different. He nodded knowingly. That's what happens when you find something that was waiting for you. Later, at home, Lisa sat by the window, the locket resting in her palm. The light from the street outside flickered gently against the gold. It wasn't about the object anymore. It was about the journey it had started. She thought of Margaret and James, of Ruth and the letters, and of every person who had written to her since. Somehow, all those lives had touched hers, layering over one another like pages in a storybook. She opened the locket once more, tracing the photograph inside. For a moment, she imagined Margaret's voice, calm, steady, full of quiet conviction. It wasn't a sound she could hear, but a feeling that washed over her like warmth. She didn't need to believe in coincidences anymore. She believed in timing, in how the right things find us when we've stopped running from what's broken. That night, she placed the locket back on its stand by the window and turned off the lights. The moonlight caught its surface, making it shimmer faintly, like it was alive. She stood there watching it for a while, the world outside humming softly in the distance. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Thank you." The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty but whole. And as the clock ticked softly in the next room, Lisa finally understood something she never had before, that sometimes, the things we think are lost forever don't need to be found by us. They just need someone to listen when they arrive.